thing for Vladimir Putin, clearly. And he forgets, yes. And Putin is a country where they, if you disagree with the government, they can kill you, and they do kill you.
Yeah.
And Trump admires that. And how do we explain why some people think that that's just exercising good leadership as opposed to criminal?
There is this idea that the leader is a strong force. If you look at the way Trump stands, he's modeling himself on previous populist leaders, it seems to me, although he wouldn't probably know much about history. But, when I watched the film when he came back to Mexico City, he reminded me very much of a young Mussolini. He used to stand in the same way. And Mussolini, of course, is modeling himself on his idea of Roman emperors, in a certain way to look noble. And Trump, it seems to me, does that. And there's always a certain amount of performance in political leadership. I mean, you are performing in a way. And Max Weber, I think, who really is perhaps we should all be reading again, talks about charismatic leadership. There is the effective leader, there's the bureaucratic leader, but there's also the charismatic leader who has some sort of quality that is very, very difficult to analyze, but is very potent. And the charismatic leader has a way of connecting with people and making them think that they can trust him or her. And
You say or her, but it's really mostly or almost always him.
yeah, there are a few examples of charismatic women leaders. I mean, there's the famous, I can't remember her name, the long-serving Prime Minister Tamil Nadu in the south of India, who used to be a Bollywood movie star, and she generally played goddesses. And she basically plays a goddess and leader of her state. And she was sent to jail for a few minor peculations the other day. And her followers sort of offered to, lie down in front of her, take her to jail. They wept, they cried. They believed that she was a reincarnation of a goddess. So I think she's got it.
I'm going to lead the witness here a little bit, okay? You know Conrad Black?
Yes.
Do you think he's an intelligent person? Let's put it this way. Do you think he's an intellectual person?
And that's a hard question. I think he's a very clever person.
That was supposed to be an easy question. I'm leading with the hard question.
Well, I've known him for a very long time and like him, but I think he holds positions which I don't think are well defended.
Okay, here's one more.
Okay.
You know he thinks Donald Trump would make a great president.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I find it extraordinary. I haven't seen him for a year or so. I haven't talked to him about it, and he wouldn't listen to me anyway. But he says a typical liberal, wishy-washy liberal. I don't know why he has this support for Trump. I really find it incredible. And it's very Canadian. I mean, I think it was always the great joke of what did Richard Nixon see when he looked at Canada. 20 or 30 million Democratic voters. But Canadians tend, if they were choosing sides in American politics, we would overwhelmingly choose the Democratic
We're a big
side.
blue state here.
Yeah, but I don't understand it really, because it seems to me, Conrad Black has always cared about international relations. I think has a very strong sense of the United States' role in the world, and here is Trump who's talking about getting out of NATO, talking about withdrawing from almost everything. And it is a mystery to me, so if you can explain it, please do.
I can't explain it, but I know, he's written books like this about Nixon and FDR, so he knows what great presidencies or significant presidencies are all about. And I remember seeing him speak once, and he said, I did business with him, he built beautiful buildings, they came in on time and on budget, and he knows how to get things done, and he'll make a great president.
Oh. Yeah. It's not fair. He's not here to defend himself, which he would do, of course, very vociferously. But I find it incomprehensible, actually.
Let's try this. We can acknowledge Stalin was a very, very bad guy,
Yeah.
but a very, very strong leader. Probably say the same thing for Putin as well. Can you give us an example of somebody that you thought was a great leader in history, but who was a real miserable son of a you-know-what?
Oh, hundreds of them, yes.
I mean, for like Canadian or American or something like that, not from bad countries, from nice countries like ours.
I think that people's public images are at odds with what they're actually like privately. And I grew up in the 1950s, and General Eisenhower was the American president, and he was sort of Uncle Ike, nice, friendly kind of a man, nice to children and small dogs. And I think the more we read about him, he was a cold fish. who would betray you at the drop of a hat if you felt you were getting in the way. So, I think the public image and the private man were really at odds. I think the same thing with Ronald Reagan. Had this tremendous, he was a great communicator. And people had this view of Reagan, that he was warm and friendly. I actually didn't see his first grandchild until the child was 4 years old. And people believe that Ronald Reagan was a great churchgoer, and he never went to church, except when he did it because that's what presidents did. So I think you will get people whose private personality is very much at odds with their public image, but that often happens, I think. I'm trying to think, you want me to think of really ghastly people.
But from nice countries.
From nice countries. There must be some hideous Swedish countries. They all seem so nice. Let me think. I'm trying to think of English ones. I'll probably think of it afterwards. Sorry, Steve, you stumped me.
No, that's okay.
People here can probably think of it more.
I once did an interview with, actually, I can remember when it was the day she won. When Kathleen Wynne won the Ontario Liberal leadership at Maple Leaf Gardens, we did an interview after the leadership convention was over, and I remember asking her about whether leaders were born, because she certainly wasn't the favorite at that convention, and she had never demonstrated what you would call sort of obvious leadership chops, so that everybody over the years that before she became leader was saying, oh, there's a future premier right there. And yet she won, and she became premier. And I asked her, are leaders born? And she said, no, they're forged. And I thought that was an interesting answer. Forged during campaigns, forged during tough times. What do you think of that answer?
It's quite an interesting answer, and I think you're probably right. I think the thing about leadership, I don't believe very much in leadership academies and leadership courses. There are plenty of them around now, and this is something very fashionable. And I'm not sure it can be taught. I think it's something that, as you're probably right, it's something that emerges. And it depends on the matching of the person and the circumstance. Napoleon, if the French Revolution hadn't taken place, Napoleon would have probably been an unremembered officer in the French military. He probably wouldn't have risen that high because he didn't have the right family connections, he didn't have the right background, and we never would have known that he was this person who had the capacity to be a great general and also run a country and dominate Europe at the same time. And I think it was really the circumstances that gave him that opportunity, and he seized it. I think leaders do have, if they share anything, it's tremendous ambition and the willingness to try it. And perhaps a sense of being gamblers, because you're putting yourself out there if you decide to be Napoleon and carry out a coup, or even running for office. In a way, you're exposing yourself to defeat. And so I think you have to be, if not optimistic, you have to at least be prepared to gamble. And I think you see people develop in office. You always get in any sort of election campaign, people say, well, they're just not prepared. The Conservative attack ads on Justin Trudeau, he's just not ready. But in fact, there is no training for something like being president or prime minister. This experience will help. But I think once you get into those offices, which can be very lonely, particularly I think in presidential systems, perhaps less so in parliamentary systems where you have a stronger party and cabinet support, you really have to work it out on your own. And I think you can, if you look at the very, unfortunately, tragically short career of John F. Kennedy, you could see him developing in the office. And I think he might have been a great second-term president. If Obama, I think, had a different Congress, you could see Obama developing as a leader as he became president. And I'm not sure there's all that much preparation that will help you prepare for those sorts of jobs. Yes, it helps that you've held positions in this, you've been head of the state, you've been a state governor, you've been a senator, but actually being president or being prime minister, experience will help you, but then you have to be prepared to be on your own.
Let me pluck one word out of what you just said there, and that was the word ambition. I want to understand that better, because obviously to win the leadership of your party and then win an election, you've got to be hugely ambitious. But certainly in this country, at least, you can't let on that you're at all ambitious, right? The minute you sort of burn for the job, we don't want you. It seems to be that way. Can you explain that conundrum?
Well, I suppose it's partly democratic politics, isn't it? That you have to be one of the people at the same time as you're offering to lead them. And so you're saying, I don't really want it. It's just a nice job. I feel I'd like to do it. But no, if you say, I am a ruthlessly ambitious person who wants it, it would count against you. But I think we do want someone who wants the job. I think of the political figures like Adlai Stevenson, who was an enormously intelligent man and had many great qualities, but I don't think he wanted to be president enough. You know, he preferred his social life, he preferred getting on with his own sort of interests. And I think in the end, I think the American electorate were right. I don't think he really wanted it enough. And it's hard. I mean, I think we expect, as I say, we expect so much of our politicians. We expect them to be, you know, folksy. We expect them to be one of the people. We expect them to be not one of the people. But I do think you have to have ambition in some form or other. You have to try and try again. I mean, Nixon is often seen as you know, the politician who kept failing, but he kept trying. He kept coming back. And he had really an extraordinary political career. And if it hadn't been for Watergate, might have gone down in history as a much better president.
There's one little story in the Bill Davis book, which 10 of you will go home with today, apparently, where he's talking to Margaret Thatcher. And he asks her, what do you love about the job? And she says, where else could a person like me in a country like this have so much power? And it offended him, because power was a word that he banned the use of in his government. He was of the view that we're there to serve. We don't, I mean, we do exercise power, of course, but we certainly don't let people on to think that that's what we're all about. But Mrs. Thatcher had no problem letting on that that's what she was all about. Two very different styles of leadership there. Do you have a view on which is sort of better?
Well, I mean, you say what you have to say in circumstances. And I think given the nature of Canadian society, and perhaps Southern Ontario in those days, if Bill Davis said, I really, really want to be, you know, premier because I just think it's power. I mean, we all would have disliked it. Whereas in Margaret Thatcher's Britain, it went down quite well. So
Until it didn't.
until it didn't.
It has a time limit.
Yeah. Well, and until she, I mean, you know, I think power goes to people's heads. I mean, the Greeks talked about hubris, and they knew what they were talking about. You know, you're surrounded by people who tell you you're a genius, and if you sooner or later begin to believe it, especially if you have a lot of success. And Margaret Thatcher waged the war against Argentina over the Falklands, in spite of all the advice not to do it, and she won. And people who knew her said after that there was no talking to her, because she said, you know, you were all wrong before.
Well, that's a good point, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a good point.
I disregarded your advice last time. You were wrong. I was right. I won 3 elections. Why should I listen to you?
Yeah.
It's not bad.
And then she lost.
And then she
Whether she was driven out of the office, she was supposed to resign, so.
Let me pluck another thing out of that previous answer that you gave about the Kathleen Wynne question. And you said something that I think will mortify, if not the faculty, then at least the students who are spending tens of thousands of dollars going to leadership academies all over the place, which you say can't be taught.
Well, I don't think it can be, but I mean, people will probably disagree with me, but what do you teach? I mean, there's certain precepts, I suppose, that are useful. I mean, when I took on the Trinity job, I had very good advice from my brother who's here tonight. He said, get to know everyone. And I did try to get to know all the people who worked here, and the students and the student leaders, and it makes a difference because they can attach a face to the person who's there. And I found that by talking to people, I would pick up things. So there's certainly useful things you can learn. But actually how you deal with difficult situations, I'm not sure you can be taught.
Can you teach character, though? Can you teach integrity, ethics, that kind of thing?
Oh, you can certainly I don't think you can teach character. Character is something you have, or, you know,
Or you don't.
but I think you certainly can teach. Any society does teach its young. And if we look at what children are taught in schools, we're trying to teach them to behave in ways we think are correct. Now, every society has different ideas of what is correct and what is the right way to behave. But yes, of course you can. And I think, you know, I think all the evidence seems to be that the psychologists will know that much better than me, that you can instill in people a code of values, you can instill in ways of behaving. And Confucius always said that if you encourage people to behave in the correct way, sooner or later they will understand why they're doing it. You know, if they behave correctly, then sooner or later they will internalize it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, that you try and instill a code into people, and that's what English public schools are all about. You know, instill codes of behavior into the empire builders. You know, I sometimes wish Donald Trump had gone to a good English public school, and who knows. But no, but I do think that, you know, but there will always be people for whom the teaching doesn't pay. You know, but I do think you get in any society codes of values, codes of behavior, which help to constrain some of the worst features of human nature. And, you know, in the world, human nature can be utterly selfish, self-seeking, not thinking of others, although there's some evidence now that we have an altruistic gene lurking away somewhere. But I do think that's part of what society does, it socializes this. And I think ideally, you want to live in a society which encourages people to think about other people.